Okay, thank you all for joining us here today. We're going to get started. This is the Better Provisioning with DEP, part of our Customer Success series here at Jamf. We have about a half hour or so of content to cover, but we will be sticking around for questions at the end. If you do have questions that arise during the presentation, please put them in the Q&A section of the WebEx. There's two chat features. The chat isn't as visible, so please use the Q&A section, which is on the far right. Just so you know, this session will be recorded and posted online for future viewing. Your presenters today are myself. I'm John Applebaugh. I'm a Customer Success Specialist here at Jamf, and joining us from our technical support team is Camden Webster. Diving right into what we're going to be covering here today, we're going to be going through some of the advantages of using the Device Enrollment Program, DEP. Also walk you through how to integrate your Jamf Pro server with DEP, and show you how to take on the process of actually enrolling a macOS device through DEP. The presentation will be more heavily aligned to macOS, although we will touch on some features of iOS DEP enrollment. At the end, we will talk a little bit about the changes in High Sierra, specifically the user-approved MDM process. This is a hot topic and definitely changes maybe some of your workflows, so we just wanted to make sure we cover our basis, and it's somewhat related to DEP enrollment as well. Again, there'll be time for questions at the end. Please put those in the Q&A section of the WebEx, and once again, this will be a recorded session for you to view at a later date. So getting right into it, you may have heard of the Device Enrollment Program. Maybe a lot of you are familiar with DEP. I just wanted to cover our basis just in case there's anyone that's a little bit unsure about what this program is. It is a provisioning program from Apple that allows you to quickly and easily deploy your Apple devices. I provided some links to the general Apple support and KB around this particular program. There's a couple requirements to actually use the DEP program. You'll either have to have your devices purchased directly from Apple or a certified reseller. You won't be able to purchase through a retail outlet or the Apple Store directly. It has to come through one of those channels. You can enroll all types of Apple devices, mainly just macOS, iOS, and tvOS. If you happen to have watchOS or other types of devices, those are not part of the DEP program. They have to be purchased on or after March 1st of 2011. There are some system requirements as well. iOS has to be iOS 7 or later. macOS has to be Mavericks or later, and Apple TVs have to be the 4th generation running tvOS 10.2 or later. And just a special note, if you happen to have an account or have devices in different countries, not every country is eligible for DEP. It's something you can check with your Apple rep, but there are some limitations globally for being able to use DEP. So you might be wondering kind of why use DEP, and I think Camden can kind of explain that in greater detail here.
All right, thanks, John. So there are a few different reasons we'd want to consider using DEP. So the first set of advantages that we'll go over here are primarily just the workflow advantages that we see with DEP. So we've got very quick provisioning of new devices as well as devices that we're going to be refreshing. It's a very quick enrollment process. We can also choose to skip various steps of the setup assistant that might not be relevant to end users. Specifically with iOS devices, we also gain supervision over the air, so we don't have to plug devices in the Apple configurator and wipe them that way. It can be straight out of the box, just connect to a Wi-Fi network and get those devices supervised. We can also automate the entire provisioning process essentially end to end, so we can even have devices drop shipped directly to end users. Maybe if you've got some remote employees, they can be shipped directly from Apple to the end user. Then on the Jamf side, and with the Device Enrollment Program, we can have those devices automatically be added to various smart groups, departments, buildings upon enrollment, and then as soon as those devices are enrolled, they can begin running policies, install configuration profiles and apps as soon as that enrollment process completes. And also, some of these management features on iOS are only available with DEP. One, for example, is the ability to remotely upgrade the iOS version. On the security side of the spectrum, DEP is really great. So we've got essentially when a device is wiped, it's going to persistently enroll into your Jamf server until we unassign it from that pre-stage in Jamf Pro or disown it or unassign it from your MDM server in the DEP portal. So if the device is stolen, even if it's wiped, it'll continue to enroll until it's removed from the device enrollment program or that pre-stage. We can also prevent the MDM profile from being removed. So this is definitely handy in environments where we don't want the end user to unmanage their device somehow or inadvertently or maliciously unless they were to wipe the machine. And then in that case, it will still enroll. We can also require user authentication during the enrollment process, which kind of has two primary benefits. The first being that it can prevent an unauthorized user from enrolling a DEP machine into your production Jamf environment. So this could be helpful if devices are sold or leased and at the end of a refresh cycle, and then we forget to disown it from the DEP program. That will prevent that end user from enrolling that device into your environment, getting your applications, Wi-Fi profiles, etc. So the second benefit here is that it will also pull in that user and location information from a connected LDAP server using Jamf Pro. So it'll pull in that information, it'll assign it to the device's inventory records. We can pull in username, email, any group associations, department building, and so on. All right, and then DEP enrollment and supervision on the iOS side also allows us to geolocate lost or stolen iOS devices using the lost mode functionality. So definitely helpful for those lost or stolen devices. And finally, we can also use configuration profiles to apply various restrictions on iOS devices that would require supervision. So it just gives us a much higher level of control over those iOS devices as opposed to a non-supervised device. So what was life like without DEP? Well, user-initiated enrollments and over-the-air enrollments, Apple Configurator, they're a little bit slower, more clunky. They're a bit more time-consuming, and they obviously don't offer a lot of the security benefits surrounding DEP. So you can just take any device, enroll through Apple Configurator. If that device is wiped, it's not going to be re-enrolled automatically. So even with the supervision that Apple Configurator 2 provides, it still limits the ability to push out those remote iOS updates, which can definitely be a handy feature. And then for macOS, imaging is kind of becoming antiquated with some of the new technologies that are coming from Apple. It's a bit more time consuming to build that base OS, run through that whole process. Just taking a box or a device out of the box and thin imaging via device enrollment program, and then using policies to lay down those packages. It's a much better user experience, and then it's more modular for IT. And then only DEP can prevent the MDM profile from being removed from the device. And then there are also some various options that we can include within our pre-stage enrollments. We can create macOS users, we can name iOS devices, skip various setup assistant steps. Some really handy features that can happen during that enrollment process and during the setup assistant.
So I hope that by covering some of the information regarding the device enrollment program, showing you some of the advantages, we've kind of definitely made the case that there's definitely a reason for most organizations to at least consider and definitely adopt DEP as part of their provisioning process. So getting into actually how you would go about doing that, the first step is really to create an account with Apple deployment programs. So the deploy.apple.com is the main website you'll want to go to. I've provided a link in the upper right as well, the Jamf IT link. That will actually link to our KB article on Jamf Nation that shows the entire process for you. So if you want to reference this back in the future, that's there for you. Just some basic requirements that you'll have to have in order to set up DEP. It has to be an organizational email. You can't use Yahoo or Gmail or anything like that. It also can't be already in use as an Apple ID. So best recommendation is maybe set up a standard account or a different account within your email exchange just so for DEP. You'll need the basic details of your organization and institution as well as a DUNS number. If you're not familiar with that, it's actually an accounting financing number that you can probably find by contacting someone in your finance department. Additionally, it's helpful to have your Apple customer number or your DEP reseller ID. This helps when you purchase new devices, Apple devices, so that they can be automatically associated to your DEP account. Once we have that DEP account set up, we'll actually be able to start integrating it with the Jamf Pro server. The first step is to kind of go out to your Jamf Pro server and download the public key. It's a .pem file. We'll then upload that public key to the Apple DEP portal. That will then allow us to, or provide us a download for a server token, and that server token has to be installed back into your Jamf Pro server, thereby completing the connection between the two services. So here we are in the Settings Global Management Device Enrollment Program setting for Jamf Pro server. The option is, if you haven't already set up a DEP account, you'll see public key as an option. This just downloads the key that's associated to your Jamf Pro instance. Once you have that, you can go to your DEP account with Apple. You'll see the option to select under Device Enrollment Program the Manage Servers option on the left. This then gives you the option to add an MDM server. After that, you'll be presented with just a screen so that shows you what you want to name this server. I would suggest something generic like Jamf Pro instance or something like that. And then the next steps after that will allow you to upload that public key. Once you have uploaded that public key, you'll be given the option to download that token. From here, you can start assigning devices to your DEP, to your Jamf Pro instance. You'll just use the Manage Devices on the left-hand screen. If you have orders from Apple, or sometimes some resellers are able to automatically associate that to your DEP account, but you can also use serial numbers, order numbers, or upload a CSV file to manually associate that to your Jamf Pro server. You'll be given a couple different options here to either assign to that server, unassign it, or disown. I would suggest strongly to not use disown unless you know for certain that you will never need this device ever again. Back in your Jamf Pro instance, you'll have the option to enter a display name. You'll create a new DEP connection. You'll upload that server token file that you received from Apple, and then you can proceed with the next steps. Once you have that token enabled, you'll start to see that devices are coming in if you've actually added any devices into your DEP account. Here we have, just under that Devices tab, shows you a serial number of the device, the model, basic description, as well as if it's assigned to any pre-stages. At this point, this particular example, it hasn't been assigned to any pre-stages. So walking you through that next step will be Camden again.
All right, thanks, John. So now that we've got our DEP instance tied to our Jamf Pro instance to pull in those lists of devices, all the serial numbers, you probably heard me mention the pre-stage enrollment term in my previous slides. So this is how we're actually going to get these devices enrolled into your Jamf Pro instance. So even though we do see the serial numbers here under our DEP settings, they're not actually enrolled into our Jamf Pro instance. We can't actually take management control over these devices. So we're going to go ahead and create a brand new pre-stage enrollment here under the Computers tab. This is just using computers as an example, but similar. The process for mobile devices is very similar. So once we get the new pre-stage created, there's a few different options here that are required. Well, we can just enter a display name. This can be, whatever you want it to be. We'll choose our DEP token. So if we only have one, sure, we've only got one option there. You can have multiple DEP tokens in Jamf Pro if you have multiple MDM servers configured on the Apple deployment side. There's also a checkbox here to automatically assign new devices. So we can only have this checked on one pre-stage within Jamf Pro. And then any device that's added to your MDM server on Apple's DEP side will automatically be assigned to this pre-stage. So that can really automate the process from end to end. So we also have some various options for sites here. If you are familiar with sites, you can certainly get your devices to enroll in specific sites, have separate pre-stages for different sites. And then kind of down below there, it's cut off a little bit, but you're also required to enter in a phone number and a department or organization description, just to kind of let the end user know who to contact if they do have issues with the enrollment process. So that information is displayed to the end user. And now a couple other pieces that we will need to set up with macOS specifically are some settings within our user-initiated enrollment settings in Jamf Pro. So we will need to specify credentials for a management account that will be created during this DEP enrollment process. So those settings do apply to both DEP enrollments as well as the standard user-initiated enrollments. All right, so once we have our options configured for a pre-stage, we'll go over to the Scope tab, and we should see that same list of devices here that we saw over on our DEP settings. So these are all the devices that are pulled in from Apple that are not currently assigned to other pre-stage enrollments that are available to be assigned to this one. So we can either check the box at the top there to just automatically check everything, or we can be more selective and choose exactly which devices we want to be tied to this pre-stage enrollment.
Yeah, so as we kind of mentioned, there's a lot of different settings within the enrollment, pre-stage enrollment that you can use. One that Camden touched upon was the automatically assign new devices. This is really handy if you have only one pre-stage, so all your devices are going to be enrolled through one particular pre-stage enrollment. Kind of a set it and forget it. Once you click that checkbox, anytime you add a device into DEP and it's associated to your Jamf MDM server, that will automatically throw it into pre-stage for your Jamf Pro instance. So that means as soon as the device is activated for the first time, it will go through DEP enrollment. Some options that might be helpful here if you want to prevent the removal of the management on the system, you have the option to make the MDM profile mandatory for both macOS and iOS. For macOS, you'll want to, if you would really like to lock it down, you can uncheck the box for allow MDM profile removal. This would prevent the MDM profile from ever being removed from the device. It would require that the device be wiped and not within a pre-stage in order for that MDM profile to actually come off the system. For iOS, we can also check the supervise option. This puts it in a state where we can add additional features, lock down certain activities. Just kind of depends on your overall enrollment strategy for iOS. So supervising iOS definitely allows for a lot of different options for you in terms of being able to prevent unenrollment, as well as setting the device name or changing the device name in the future remotely. Also allows for a lot of control over what the end user could do with an iOS device. Similarly, we have the require authentication, which Camden touched upon. I just wanted to reiterate that this is using an LDAP or SSO or single sign-on solution to actually log in, start the enrollment process, and then associate that device within your Jamf Pro server to that particular user. So if you have LDAP configured, you will see this option as part of the DEP pre-stage. There is a directory payload for macOS at the bottom of pre-stage enrollment settings. This allows you to configure a directory binding. Just a word of note that this does increase the enrollment time, and of course the device will have to be able to complete that bind, be able to access that bind point where that directory server is. So if you happen to have a more locked down AD environment, doesn't have a connection to outside users, and you sent a computer to them to have them enroll through DEP, it's not going to complete that directory payload as part of the enrollment process. So it would be in an unbound state at that point. Additionally, there is the option for under account settings to add additional users if you so choose. You can also do this via a policy and just add a local account after enrollment. Sometimes that provides a little bit better delivery of that local account to the end system.
All right, thanks, John. So DP is pretty solid program for the most part, but obviously everything kind of has its points of failure at some point. So being on the technical support side of things, we see a few issues here and there, some pretty common scenarios that we might run into with the device enrollment program. So this is between the connection between the Jamf Pro server and Apple's DEP servers. We may see this type of message either within the pre-stage enrollment itself or within our DEP settings in Jamf Pro. Typically, this can point to a few different common causes. Apple updates their terms and conditions for the device enrollment program surrounding most major operating system updates. So if the terms and conditions haven't been accepted in a certain period of time, we might see a break in communication between Jamf Pro and the device enrollment program, not able to get those new devices in, not able to reassign pre-stage enrollments. Some other issues that might occur would be just a drift in the server time between your Jamf Pro server if you're hosting it on-premise, as well as compared to the time on Apple's end. Otherwise, if we have a more locked down Jamf Pro environments, maybe we have our Jamf Pro server behind a proxy, that Jamf Pro server might not even be able to reach Apple's DEP servers to grab that information. So a few different issues there. And these errors will typically be reflected in the Jamf Pro server logs. That's always a great place to go to see exactly what's going on. All right, so a few common issues that can occur between the Jamf Pro server and the client that's actually being enrolled. Potentially the device just hasn't been assigned to a pre-stage enrollment yet. So in that case, it would proceed right through the setup assistance without the unique settings that we've put in the pre-stage to skip various steps. We wouldn't be prompted to enroll. We might also have, this is more common for environments that have either migrated from an on-premise solution to our cloud-hosted solution or have maybe implemented a third-party SSL certificate recently in their on-premise solution. They might have an anchor certificate in their pre-stage enrollments. So that pre-stage enrollment was created a while ago. It automatically added an anchor certificate for the built-in Jamf Pro SSL certificate to establish that trust during the enrollment process. But now that we're on a cloud-hosted instance or a Jamf Pro instance that has that trusted third-party SSL certificate, we can go ahead and remove that anchor certificate. And actually having it in there can cause issues with the enrollment process. There's essentially a mismatch between what the device thinks it should trust and what it's actually seeing from the Jamf Pro server. And also we can see some issues if the device time is off from the Jamf Pro server or from Apple servers. So a lot of common issues there with device time especially. And then just basically network connectivity issues. Potentially the device is maybe on a network that doesn't have access to Apple's push notification servers, so they can't actually receive that MDM profile. Or maybe it's on a network that doesn't even have access to the Jamf Pro server. Maybe the Jamf Pro server is hosted on-premise. It's only available internally. Someone's trying to enroll their device on an external network, and they are getting that enrollment record from Apple, but they're not actually able to complete that enrollment because they can't hit the Jamf Pro server.
Okay, well, switching topics just slightly here, we did want to touch on High Sierra, the user-approved MDM process that's sort of new for macOS. It's sort of related to DEP enrollment here, just because it is one of the features of being able to enroll through DEP is having a user-approved MDM.
All right, so just some background on the user-approved MDM state. So starting in macOS 10.13.2, we saw that in certain enrollment scenarios, you see a little message within System Preferences in the Profiles section that would prompt you to approve the MDM profile. You can kind of think of this as sort of like almost the equivalent of supervision to macOS, where we actually need to approve that MDM profile in order to obtain certain management functionality over the device. The only piece of management functionality that we do require for user-approved MDM is the whitelisting of third-party kernel extensions through a configuration profile. So if you are deploying software that includes third-party kernel extensions, you can create a configuration profile within Jamf Pro to automatically allow those kernel extensions to be installed on a client machine. And so using DEP is the only way at the moment that we can automatically approve that profile during the enrollment process without having to manually click that button. There might also be additional features in the future that do require user-approved MDM to be implemented. All right, so if a device is enrolled through DEP, like I said, the profile is automatically going to be user-approved for MDM. If it's enrolled before 10.13.2 and then upgraded, it'll be grandfathered in. The profile will still be user-approved. But if it's enrolled after 10.13.2 and without DEP, so if we use the user-initiated enrollment, for example, or a quick add package, the user would have to manually enable the MDM profile for user approval after the fact. So this has to be physically done on the device. Can't do it remotely, can't really script it. It has to be physically done at the computer. So any activity that initiates a re-enrollment or a reinstallation of the MDM profile on a Mac will essentially reset that user-approved status. So troubleshooting MDM issues, it may be tempting to remove and re-add the MDM profile. Definitely something we'll want to avoid going forward here with user-approved MDM, unless we do have the ability to physically approve that MDM profile on the machine. All right, so like I mentioned before, there is this approve button here within the system preferences profiles section. So this is what we would have to do here in order to actually approve that profile if it were somehow either enrolled without DEP, or if the profile was removed and re-added to remove that user approved state. And the notification is a little bit vague here, so it could lead to some confusion on the end user side. All right, so like I mentioned before, really the only piece of management that is required for, or that user-approved MDM requires, is the whitelisting of third-party kernel extensions. So most of the kernel extensions that you might see on a computer are installed with the operating system, but there are a few that can be installed through a third-party application, such as file sharing applications like Dropbox, antivirus applications, different virtualization apps for the Mac. And so 10.13.2, users need to actually authorize those kernel extensions during the installation process of that software. So if we are deploying these sorts of applications down to clients in a silent fashion through a policy or through another method, we would need to use a configuration profile or some means of management to automatically whitelist those kernel extensions to allow for a successful installation.
And as Camden mentioned, there's a configuration profile now within Jamf Pro, if you're using the later versions, that allow you to essentially control that approved kernel extension process. So you have two options. One is to allow the users to approve kernel extensions, which is the default for all Macs. If your users, for some reason, aren't administrators on their computer, this will definitely present a little bit of a problem, because they'd have to enter admin credentials in order to approve those third-party kernel extensions. So to get around that, you could use a different option, which is to specify your approved kernel extensions. For this, you will need to know some details about that particular extension. You'll need to know the bundle ID and the team ID of that particular application. It's a little bit easy to find if you're using any kernel extensions, and by and large you probably are. To identify any sort of kernel extensions, you can run this terminal command. Pretty simple. If you would like to find that team ID and bundle ID that are actually within that .kex file, they can be read from terminal using either codesign or defaults read commands. There's a very helpful Jamf Nation thread that I think is useful if you want to collect those bundle IDs and team IDs of different kernel extensions you might be using. This would be any third-party ones. The Apple ones are already going to be approved. We're really talking about third-party applications that you might be pushing out to your end users via a policy. You'll want to make sure that if they are using kernel extensions, that we have this configuration profile in place to whitelist them. So just jamf.it/kex will give you an overview of that discussion that's happening on Jamf Nation, as well as a script that can be used to collect that information you'll need for the configuration profile. With that, we've reached the end of the content that we planned on covering today. I wanted to thank you all for attending. Just for a reminder, this webinar was recorded, and we will be posting it online in the future. It typically takes us a few days to get that up online, so it won't be available immediately. We do encourage you to use the resources that we provided, such as articles and technical documents on Jamf Nation. If you have any questions, we are sticking around for a little while to answer those. We did get some in the Q&A section. If you didn't get a chance to get one in, please go ahead and type that into the Q&A section. We do have some monitors just checking periodically to make sure we're staying up to date. For our first question from Christy, we have a scenario where they have employee-owned systems as well as company-owned. And basically, the assumption here is they won't be able to add any employee-owned into the company DEP account. And so what kind of things do we need to be aware of for enrollment if it's an employee-owned device? You're correct in assuming that it won't be able to be added to DEP for macOS specifically. There might be a workflow to do that for iOS, but it would require wiping the device completely to put it into supervision, which most people probably wouldn't be willing to accept, but you never know. In terms of enrollment, it's going to be affected by the user-approved MDM process. Jamf is working on implementing a solution so that the user-initiated enrollment process can potentially be also an alternative for getting that user-approved MDM in place. So that's something that I would just look for in future releases and release notes that we might have for that particular workflow. Anything else you can think of, Camden, that might affect that particular scenario?
No, that's good.
Yeah. Had a question around the naming convention for devices, particularly the computer name. I think that's a common question for macOS pre-stage enrollment because, that is something that people are familiar with maybe on iOS side. It's not possible really through DEP pre-stage enrollment currently to set a naming convention. I believe the only thing you might be able to do is through like a directory binding. Is that correct?
Yeah, so within the directory binding payload, we do have the client ID field. So that client ID field you can plug a variable such as $serial number to put in the serial number as the computer name essentially, but that's only during the binding process. So we're pretty limited with what we can do with the naming convention. But if you are binding machines to Active Directory through pre-stage enrollment, you do at least have that option to prevent having all of your computers named MacBook Pro or something like that. So there are some considerations there for AD binding, but unfortunately there's not much we can do really with overall computer naming.
We had a question from Greg on how you can leverage DEP in a higher ed lab, so a higher education environment with macOS devices. Specifically, how do you refresh that entire lab each year? Is there something you can do remotely to start that process?
Yeah, so really the best way to do that would be so with the DEP enrollment process, it really only happens during that Apple Setup Assistant. So unfortunately, there isn't really a great way to necessarily bypass that Setup Assistant and also enroll the device through DEP. So we do still have the option to use a quick add package to enroll devices. Like John mentioned, we will have some different enrollment methods available in the future to allow for that user-approved MDM state. But using DEP with lab environments, you essentially would just need to wipe the machine either through applying a base OS image. You could use something like an ASR command or disk utility to accomplish that with, say, target mode imaging. And then once you do get back into that clean basic OS, you still could run through the Setup Assistant to get enrolled through DEP. So it would require a little bit of work, but it certainly is still possible.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the wipe command, the MDM command, but I believe that works best in like a one-off scenario. It doesn't work great if you have like hundreds of devices that have to be wiped and then re-enrolled.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't really install the operating system again, so you would have to run through the restore partition to either download a fresh OS from Apple, or you could certainly use a DMG image to restore that device.
So Steve had a question on whether the DEP enrollment process circumvents SIP, which is System Integrity Protection, which I believe was introduced with 10.10.
Yeah, so starting actually in 10.11, certain parts of the operating system are protected by System Integrity Protection by Apple. So when you're logged into the machine, you can't necessarily delete certain parts of the system to prevent it from becoming unstable. So just kind of Apple's way of locking down certain parts of the operating system to avoid accidental deletion. So DEP does not necessarily circumvent anything with System Integrity Protection, but it does allow you to get enrolled, apply your MDM profile, get enrolled into Jamf Pro. There really isn't any reason that you would need to necessarily disable SIP unless you were doing a more advanced workflow, trying to do something that's a little bit outside of what DEP would typically entail. Yeah, and so we had a question here from Benedict, just asking how secure the connection between Apple and the Jamf server is. Yeah, it's a very secure connection. So when we do run through that process of generating the token, so we download a private key. There's a key pair stored in the Jamf database. So we download that public key. We give that public key to Apple, who then gives us a token back based on the contents of that public key. So it's a unique token based on our specific Jamf instance, and then that token is stored in the Jamf database. So it's all this information is encrypted in the database, and then the Jamf Pro communicates with Apple over a secure HTTPS connection.
Okay, so we had a question with regards to user-approved MDM process. If we had a machine that's already on High Sierra that were in DEP, do you need to go back and actually approve the MDM profile? And I think no, if you have enrolled through to DEP, unless for some reason that MDM profile got removed. That would be the only scenario I would think that we might have to do that.
Yeah, yep, that's correct.
Okay, so backing up a little bit, there was a question kind of around getting devices into your DEP account and being able to get that into your MDM server. Generally, if you purchase through Apple, a lot of those orders can be automatically added into your DEP account, and then you just have to tie it to your MDM server. I believe there's an option within DEP that allows you to just automatically assign devices to that MDM server. So you could have two automated steps of one, any new device gets added, it gets added to that particular MDM server, and then within the Jamf Pro instance, you could have the pre-stage automatically getting all the new devices. So as soon as you purchase new things, it just trickles down into the pre-stage automatically.
Yeah, and so really that manual process of adding serial numbers or adding a CSV of serial numbers is really only going to be for, say, maybe past purchases that don't show up under your DEP account, maybe some older devices that were purchased prior to establishing that DEP account that might not show up in there. So there's a few different scenarios, but it's really not something you'd have to do on a very regular basis if you're just purchasing all your devices through Apple, for example.
So we did have a question around the user-approved MDM process coming for Jamf Pro 10.3. 10.3 is still in beta. We're close to a release. Unfortunately, we're not able to give additional details beyond that. I would encourage you, if you're interested, to participate in the beta program, as that provides NDA agreement just to protect our process here. But it will be released soon, and there definitely will be the release notes will include a lot of details about that feature. So we're a little bit ahead of the game, but it is coming out soon. So a couple other questions that we didn't get to, I think, are pretty specific. We'll try to answer those offline. But in general, if there's anything else that comes up, just feel free to reach out to Jamf through different means. You can either, if you're having technical issues, you definitely can create a ticket for Jamf support. It's just a question about how to go about setting this up, or more information about the DEP program. I definitely recommend reaching out to your account representative for those sorts of questions as well. With that, I appreciate you guys taking the time to sit with us for a little while. Great to see you. I hope to see you at another future webinar. But again, this will be a recorded session, so you can review it and share it with colleagues in the future. Thanks again.